Hello everyone, I am Vanished Signal. And before we start with some new stories, like and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down below from where you are watching this. The man in camera 4. I work night security at a storage facility on the outskirts of town. It's not a glamorous gig. Just 10 rows of corrugated metal units and a small security shack outfitted with 6 aging monitors hooked up to a camera system that hasn't been upgraded in over a decade. Most nights, I scroll through my phone, sip bitter gas station coffee, and make a slow lap every hour. Quiet, uneventful, familiar. But about 3 weeks ago, that routine shattered. It began with something small. Camera 4 lit up with a motion alert at 3:17 a.m. That in itself isn't rare. Sometimes a raccoon gets curious, or a client makes a late-night visit to their unit. But when I clicked the feed, I didn't see a car or an animal. I saw a man inside Unit 84. He stood completely still in the center of the concrete floor, facing the camera. He had no visible face, just a blur of pale skin where features should have been. No motion, no blinking. Just an eerie stillness, like he was posing for something. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and rushed down the row, adrenaline flooding my chest. When I got there, Unit 84 was sealed, padlock untouched, no signs of forced entry. Inside, it was empty and undisturbed. Just a thin coat of dust and the hum of silence. I returned to the shack and reviewed the footage. The man didn't walk in or out. He simply appeared in the frame, stood there for 20 minutes, and then vanished. No fade, no sound. One moment there, the next gone. I showed the footage to my supervisor the next morning. He called it a glitch, probably some artifact from the outdated system. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But then, 2 nights ago, it happened again, this time on camera 3. That camera covers the front gate, which is locked and electronically monitored. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the same figure appeared just outside the fence. Still faceless, still motionless. He was staring up at the camera like he knew I was watching. No alarms, no breach, just there. Last night, it escalated. At 3:16 a.m., all 6 monitors went black at once. I smacked the side of the console, checked the power supply, even rebooted the feed. Nothing. Then, at 3:37, the screens flickered back to life. But instead of showing the usual live camera views, all 6 monitors were broadcasting the same footage. Me, sitting at my desk. Frozen, not moving, not blinking. The timestamp was accurate. I glanced up at the actual overhead camera. It should have been aimed at my back. But when I checked, it had shifted. It was now pointing at the door behind me, the one that only opens from the inside. I haven't gone back since. But the owner texted me this morning to say Unit 84's padlock was missing, and the feed from camera 4 was looping again. The 3rd elevator. I'm a security systems technician for a 28-story corporate building in the financial district. The place is a fortress. Badge access for every floor, biometric scans on the data rooms, and a fully integrated surveillance system with more than 80 high-resolution cameras. I've been maintaining that system for over 6 years. I know every wire, every signal path, every blind spot. That's why what I saw still keeps me up at night. It was a Tuesday. I was pulling a routine overnight maintenance shift to patch the firmware on our servers. Around 2:30 a.m., I was flipping through the elevator feeds when camera 12 displayed something I didn't recognize. A 3rd elevator. It was labeled Elevator C. That shouldn't have been possible. Our building only has 2 elevators, clearly marked A and B. I stared at the feed. The timestamp was real time. The camera ID was valid, yet no one had ever told me about this shaft. As I watched, the doors of elevator C opened. A man stepped out, wearing a grimy maintenance uniform, carrying no tools and wearing no ID badge. He moved with purpose into a hallway I had never seen before. Concrete walls, dim overhead lighting, no signage. I tried locating the camera on our internal map. The system returned an error. Unknown device. I checked the footage history. The elevator didn't exist prior to 2:44 a.m. At 2:58, the feed abruptly cut out. Not a fade, not static, just a hard stop. The display returned to its original assignment, the janitor's supply closet. I pulled the archive to save the footage, but the file deleted itself. I didn't even get a warning. The folder now read, "Access denied." The next night, I stayed late. At 2:44 a.m. sharp, elevator C appeared again. This time, the man didn't exit. He just stared into the camera. Then he smiled. A long, deliberate smile like he'd been waiting for me to return. He held up a whiteboard with a handwritten message. "See you soon." I logged off, packed up, and left immediately. I haven't returned to the building since. I work freelance now. But the strange part, ever since that night, I hear the soft chime of an elevator every evening around 2:30. It's quiet, mechanical, familiar. And I live in a one-story house with no elevator and no upstairs neighbors. The hallway that wasn't there. I monitor cameras overnight at a mid-sized medical complex that was partially renovated after a fire 10 years ago. The newer sections are spotless, white-walled, humming with air purifiers, and lit with LED strips that never flicker. But the East Wing remains closed off. It's officially marked as under restoration. Yet, in my 3 years there, I've never seen a single contractor go in or out. The double doors are padlocked, the windows boarded. According to the map, the space was sealed after the fire. Most of the other guards ignore it. We're not even supposed to monitor that section anymore, but for some reason, the camera feed is still active. One night, around 2 a.m., I was checking archived footage for a nurse who'd misplaced her badge. I ran through all the usual angles, hallways, stairwells, elevators, until I opened camera 22. That one's listed under the East Wing, and I nearly skipped it out of habit. But when the feed loaded, I froze. The screen showed a hallway I'd never seen before. It branched off between two storage rooms that, according to every blueprint I'd ever studied, shared a wall. There shouldn't have been any space between them. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit. The walls were unfinished concrete, and along both sides were gurneys, some with stained sheets still draped over them. The lights buzzed faintly. At first, I assumed it was archived footage from before the fire, accidentally filed under the wrong timestamp. But the live clock in the corner ticked forward. As I watched, a man walked into frame. He was tall, thin, dressed in faded blue scrubs that looked like they hadn't been issued in decades. He moved slowly, as if exhausted or sedated. He passed 3 gurneys before stopping. Then, without hesitation, he turned to the camera and looked directly at it. Directly at me. The hallway lights flickered, and in that split second of darkness, red letters appeared on the left wall. When the lights returned, I leaned in and squinted. The word was clear. Help. I pulled up the floor plans, flipping through every renovation update, fire code report, and blueprint stored on the server. There was no hallway there, just solid concrete. I called facilities. The guy on duty told me the entire East Wing had been gutted after the fire and sealed. "There's nothing back there," he said. "It's not even wired for power anymore." When I returned to the feed, camera 22 had gone to static. The timestamp froze at 2:13 a.m. A week passed with no activity. Then, at exactly 2:13, the hallway reappeared. The same man was back, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, another figure entered the frame. They were pushing a gurney, slow and steady, its wheels squeaking. There was something beneath the sheet. It shifted, just once. I've submitted 3 incident reports. No response. Camera 22 now only turns on between 2:13 and 2:21 a.m. every Wednesday. And every week, more gurneys appear in the frame. The break room screen. In the underground parking garage beneath the casino where I work security, there's a break room tucked into a corner of level B2. It's small, just a metal table, a stained microwave, a coffee machine that works half the time, and a mounted TV that loops through the building's live security feeds. It's where we go to hide from the managers, eat vending machine sandwiches, and nurse our aching feet. It was a slow Thursday night, around 3 a.m., when I stepped in to warm up. The parking lot was empty. No noise, no movement. I sat down with a cup of coffee and glanced at the screen. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the casino floor, front entrance, loading dock, and elevator cams. Then, mid-sip, the feed glitched. It wasn't a normal digital glitch. It flashed once, cut to black, then returned with a camera angle I'd never seen before. A hallway. Long, narrow, lined with red carpeting and closed brass-trimmed doors. It looked like an old hotel, not anything in our building. The camera panned slowly forward, like someone was walking and filming with a mounted Steadicam. I blinked, looked around the break room, and radioed the control room. "Is there a new camera feed?" I asked. The response came back quick. "Negative. All feeds accounted for." But when I turned back to the screen, the hallway was still scrolling. Slowly, deliberately. Eventually, the camera stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. The number on the door, 313. The screen cut to black again. Then it returned, showing the inside of a guest room. Dust floated in the air. The curtains were drawn, the furniture covered in sheets, except for the bed. On the edge of the mattress sat a man. His back was to the camera. He didn't move. After 10 seconds, he turned around. He looked directly into the camera, into me. Then he said my name. Plainly, calmly, just once. I dropped my coffee and bolted to the control room. When I checked the recording logs, there was no sign of the feed. Camera 313 didn't exist. The footage was gone. But now, every night at 3 a.m., the break room monitor flickers. Not a full feed, just a flash of red carpet and a door with a brass plate. And last night, when I walked past the break room door, I heard the hum of static, followed by the sound of someone quietly knocking. Motion Sector 7. The distribution center I work at runs 24/7, a cavernous building of endless aisles and heavy machinery that rarely sleeps. The night shift is managed through a matrix of motion detection cameras, all monitored by a skeleton crew from a dimly lit control room tucked near the loading docks. Sector 7 is one of the farthest corners of the facility, mostly used for overflow storage. Rows of shrink-wrapped pallets stacked high with unopened merchandise. After 10 p.m., no one is ever scheduled to be back there. So when the alert for motion in Sector 7 tripped at 2:34 a.m., I barely looked up at first. Probably a raccoon. Or maybe one of the massive rats we sometimes see darting across the floor after a delivery shift. Still, protocol is protocol. I clicked into the feed to verify. What I saw wasn't an animal. It was a man, or at least something shaped like one. He moved past the shelves with stiff, unnatural jerks, arms swinging too wide, head tilted at an angle that seemed impossible to hold. He wore a gray hoodie soaked through with something dark that dripped in heavy streaks down his arms. His hands hung limp at his sides, fingers curled just slightly, like claws. His face, when he looked up briefly toward the camera, wasn't pixelated or blurred. It was just missing, like the camera couldn't register what was there. I paged the floor supervisor. Together we searched Sector 7 from end to end, our flashlights cutting through the tall rows. There was nothing. No sign of forced entry, no open doors, no footprints. But near the far wall, we found a pallet tipped over, boxes crushed and spilled across the floor like something large had plowed through them. And when we returned to the control room, we discovered the feed from Sector 7 had reset its timestamp. 2 minutes of footage were gone, erased from the system with no warning. We ran diagnostics. The cameras were working fine. The software showed no errors. But every attempt to export or back up the video failed. The files deleted themselves seconds after opening. We even tried filming the monitor with a phone. The screen went black as soon as we hit record. Since that night, the motion detector in Sector 7 trips at the exact same time, 2:34 a.m. every single night. The figure always appears, and every night he gets a little closer to the camera. Last night, he stood just beneath it, looking up, and for the first time, he lifted a hand and waved. Signal in the nursery. The long-term care facility where I volunteer overnight is a quiet place. Most of the residents are elderly, a few have advanced dementia, and several are in hospice care. Nights pass slowly. Routine wellness checks, paperwork, and the occasional emergency. To break the monotony, we monitor the 60-plus security feeds from a little office off the main lobby. Most cameras cover active patient wings, entrances, and hallways. But a handful still feed from the East Wing, an abandoned section that once housed the facility's maternity ward. No one has used that wing since a fire 20 years ago, which gutted 3 rooms and blackened the hallway with smoke damage. It was never reopened. The doors remain locked. The lights never turn on. The whole wing feels like a sealed-off relic from another time. I'd nearly forgotten Camera 11 even existed until one night around 2:45 a.m., when its feed suddenly flickered to life. At first, it was just static. Then a dim image resolved. The hallway in the East Wing, grainy but unmistakable. A faint glow leaked from under the door of room 2C. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. I leaned in and turned up the audio. That's when I heard the music. It was a lullaby. Rock-a-bye, baby? Played on something old and warped, like a toy music box low on wind. Behind the melody came another sound, fragile, wavering. A baby's cry, soft but real. Gripping my key ring, I made my way down the corridor. Dust coated the floor. My footsteps echoed too loudly. At the threshold to the East Wing, I paused. It was freezing cold. My flashlight trembled in my hand. As I approached room 2C, I saw the light spilling from beneath the door. I opened it slowly. Inside, the room was spotless. Clean white walls, a polished crib in the center, a slowly turning mobile casting spinning shadows on the ceiling. The lullaby continued to play, even though I saw no source. The crib was empty. I stepped closer, hypnotized by the motion of the mobile. Then the music stopped. Behind me, I heard the door click shut. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I yanked open the door and rushed back to the security office. When I pulled up the feed from camera 11, it had returned to static. The system logs showed signal lost, no active camera. The records listed room 2C as decommissioned since 2004. At sunrise, I asked one of the senior nurses about it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's where the fire began. In the nursery. There were complications." She wouldn't elaborate. But that night, and every few nights since, the lullaby returns, faint and distorted, playing softly through the intercom system between 2 and 3 a.m. No one mentions it aloud. But I know they hear it too. We all do. The booth in the lobby. I used to work the night shift as a security guard at a downtown theater that had been repurposed into a multi-use performance venue. The building was old, a Frankenstein's monster of vintage architecture patched together with modern upgrades. The main lobby still had its marble floors and grand chandelier, but backstage corridors were lined with freshly painted drywall. Decay and renovation coexisted uncomfortably. Most nights were dull. Occasional visits from cleaning crews, late deliveries, or staff prepping for the next day's shows. But the box office never saw any activity after hours. It had been out of use for years, sealed behind glass with a hand-painted sign that read, "Closed." That particular night, just past 3 a.m., I was alone in the security room watching the usual camera cycle when something caught my eye. Camera 5, which monitors the box office, flickered briefly. It stabilized into a crystal-clear feed, and suddenly there was movement. A figure had appeared inside the booth. At first, I thought it was a delayed recording, maybe an old file looping through a glitch. But the timestamp was current, and everything else looked real-time. Inside the glass, a woman sat at the counter. She wore a faded red blazer with exaggerated shoulder pads, something out of a 1970s usher's uniform. Her dark hair was tightly curled, and she held a fan of yellowed ticket stubs in one hand. With the other, she traced along what seemed to be a paper ledger, flipping the pages slowly. Her movements were repetitive, as if she'd been doing the same thing forever. I switched to the adjacent hallway cam to check the lobby. All the doors were still locked. There was no way anyone had entered the building. I radioed the janitorial team on site and asked someone to check the box office. After a pause, one cleaner responded. He was standing 20 feet from the booth and confirmed it was completely dark. No one inside. I stared back at the feed. The woman turned around. Her face was wrong, slightly warped, like an old video corrupted over time. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and her mouth never quite closed. She slowly lifted one hand and pressed her palm against the glass. I blinked, and she vanished. The box office was empty again. The counter clean, the chair tucked under the desk. But less than a minute later, the office printer behind me began to hum. It hadn't been used in weeks. A single slip of paper fed out slowly. It was an old theater ticket stub. Dated February 11th, 1973. The night the original theater burned down during a late showing. 6 people died, including the box office attendant. The elevator feed loop before changing careers. I spent nearly 2 years working security at a data center located in a nondescript tower downtown. The building housed several floors of ultra-secure server rooms, accessible only to employees with high-level clearance. Every door, hallway, and elevator was covered by multiple layers of security. Badge access, retinal scans, motion detectors, and a full camera suite monitored around the clock. As night staff, my job was mostly to watch those feeds and log anomalies, most of which were routine. Then one Tuesday morning, at exactly 1:06 a.m., I noticed something that wasn't routine at all. An elevator, listed as inactive in the system, suddenly activated. This particular elevator had been removed from service months earlier and was slated for decommissioning. Yet there it was, lit up in the live grid. I pulled up the camera feed. A man stood inside. He wore a black suit with no tie, pale hands folded neatly in front of him. His posture was rigid, his face blank. He wasn't doing anything, just standing perfectly still in the center of the elevator. The floor display was frozen between levels. For over 2 minutes, he didn't move. Then the lights inside the elevator began to flicker. He blinked once, slowly, deliberately. The car shuddered as if trying to move, but it didn't reach a floor. The man's mouth curled into a smile, though it didn't touch his eyes. It felt rehearsed, hollow. And then the feed jumped. It looped. Same scene, same man, same blink. But something was off. On the second loop, he leaned slightly to one side. His smile widened unnaturally. His eyes opened a little too far. The loop played again and again. With each pass, the man changed. Barely perceptible at first, but increasingly grotesque. His neck tilted farther, his arms stiffened. His grin stretched like his jaw was unhinging. Each time, the timestamp continued forward. The loop wasn't a replay. It was happening in real time. Eventually, the feed froze altogether. When I checked the system log, it listed a fault in the elevator's firmware and initiated a remote reset. I called maintenance to inspect the elevator. They found nothing. No signs of a passenger. No movement on the internal logs. No technical error. They told me the camera must have picked up a visual echo from an old file. But that same elevator activates every Tuesday now, always at 1:06 a.m. The man always appears. If I try to delete the file, it regenerates. If I record it, the footage corrupts. It doesn't matter what we do. Last week, for the first time, the man turned and looked directly into the camera. His mouth moved just once. I couldn't hear him, but I recognized what he said. He said my name. The maintenance door. In the underground transit station where I worked the night shift, the cameras were ancient but surprisingly reliable. Every corridor, stairwell, and platform was scheduled for inspection and cleaning in strict rotations, and each was monitored with grainy but steady video feeds. On the lowest level, tucked away behind a forgotten ticket booth and a shuttered convenience store, was a heavy metal door labeled Maintenance 03. The door was unusual, not because of how it looked, but because of how it didn't function. It had no handle, no keypad, and it wasn't on any of the building's blueprints. I figured it led to a sealed utility shaft or was left over from an old renovation, so I never gave it much thought. That changed when I began receiving motion alerts from the hallway it sat in, always between 2 a.m. and 2:10 a.m. At first, I wrote it off as the result of bad wiring or rodents. The feed never showed anything but flickering lights and shadow. But the second time I reviewed the footage closely, I noticed something different. The door, it was slightly ajar. Not open, not swinging, just cracked, as if someone had tried to push it open but stopped halfway. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and went down. When I arrived, the hallway was silent and freezing. The door was sealed shut again, as though it had never moved. No draft, no sign of tampering. On a whim, half laughing to myself, I knocked once. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks in return. Slow, evenly spaced, from the other side. I backed away and turned to leave. But something about the air in the hallway had changed. It felt thicker, like walking through static. I rushed back upstairs and reviewed the tape. The footage had glitched during the exact moment I knocked. 5 seconds of static replaced the live feed. The system registered no motion. The timestamp skipped. That night, I had a dream about the hallway. In the dream, it was longer, stretched impossibly into blackness. At the end of it, that maintenance door stood open. Something waited in the dark beyond it, but I couldn't see what. When I returned to work after a weekend off, the guard who had covered my shift told me he'd heard noises, not from the hallway, but from the camera itself. He said it sounded like someone tapping directly on the lens. We submitted a maintenance request to inspect the door. A two-man team went down, checked the hardware, and came back with a short report. They said the door wasn't even a door. It had no hinges on the inside, no frame, just a metal slab fused to the wall, like it was never meant to open. And yet, every night since, the motion alerts continue. Room B12. The private research lab where I worked graveyard monitoring shifts had multiple underground levels, most of which were off limits to non-technical personnel. I didn't have clearance to enter the sub-basement, but I was allowed access to the camera feeds for security review. The lower levels contained archived cold storage, sealed experiment rooms, and outdated record depositories, sections of the building that, for the most part, had been left untouched for years. Room B12 had been inactive for months. No logged entries, no badge swipes, no requests for access. Just a locked door and a dusty camera that hadn't pinged once in all my time there. Until one Thursday. At exactly 3:41 a.m., the motion alert for B12 triggered. The feed activated on its own, showing a dim, flickering view of the sealed room. I stared at the monitor, heart pounding. The room appeared empty. Only a gurney, a small desk, and a wall of sealed storage bins remained. Then, from the far right corner, a figure stepped into frame. She moved with slow, uncertain steps, barefoot, wearing a paper-thin hospital gown that hung loose on her thin frame. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the poor lighting. Her long black hair concealed her face entirely. She walked around the gurney twice, then stopped and faced the camera. For 5 solid minutes, she did not move. Then she looked up. Her face was wrong, blurred. It didn't look like a camera issue. It looked like her face was being erased in real time, the pixels warping and swimming. I radioed the on-call supervisor and told him to meet me at the sub-basement. We arrived 10 minutes later. The camera feed had gone to static. When we unlocked the door, room B12 was empty, completely undisturbed. The bins untouched, the air stale and cold. We checked the footage. The file was still there, but all 30 minutes showed only static. No audio, no visible image. Just the timestamp rolling forward, unbroken. I told myself it had to be a system glitch. I even tried to convince myself I'd hallucinated it, that the pressure of the long shifts was finally getting to me. But the following week, at the exact same time, the feed for B12 flickered on again. She returned, moved exactly the same way. But this time, she carried something, a clipboard. She placed it gently on the gurney, faced the camera, and began walking toward the door. Her head tilted slightly to the side. Then the feed cut to black. When we opened the room, the clipboard was there. Nothing written on it, no pen, just a single page of white paper and 3 printed words centered at the top. Are you watching? The rooftop loop. The office tower I worked in had 20 floors and a single rooftop access door monitored by one isolated security camera. Nobody was allowed up there, at least not after hours. The rooftop was off limits to employees, locked with a keypad code known only to facilities, and protected by a silent alarm. Still, the building's protocol required a live feed from every exterior exit, so we kept the rooftop camera running. For 3 years, that feed never changed, just static shadows cast by the blinking red light and the occasional gust of wind stirring debris. That changed one Friday night in October. At exactly 12:03 a.m., I noticed movement on the rooftop camera. At first, I thought it was a reflection. But then the figure stepped fully into view. They emerged from the far left edge of the frame, walking slowly and deliberately, as if they knew they were being watched. The figure wore outdated business attire, a loose tie, a long overcoat, and moved like someone deep in thought, unfazed by the wind sweeping across the rooftop. They walked directly into the center of the frame, turned, and looked directly at the camera. They smiled. I froze, checked the access logs. Nothing. No badge activity. No motion alerts from the rooftop door. I contacted facilities to confirm the door was still locked from the inside. It was. The alarm had remained silent, yet the figure stayed in frame, motionless for several minutes. Then, with stiff, unnatural movements, they turned and walked out of view, toward the edge of the roof. The feed glitched, scrambled, and then restarted. Same time code, same scene. The same figure entered from the left again. Same steps, same pause, same smile. A perfect loop, but with subtle differences. On the second playback, their smile was wider. Too wide. Their eyes didn't quite align. The third time, their neck tilted at an impossible angle. They stepped closer to the lens, stopping just inches away. You could see the fog from their breath smudge the glass. The loop has repeated every Friday since, always at 12:03 a.m. Every week, the figure gets closer to the camera. Every week, the glitch lasts longer. One Friday, I attempted to disable the camera before the loop started. The feed shut off, but the glitch transferred, appearing instead on our lobby camera. Now, each Friday night, I leave the office before midnight. The last time I stayed, I thought I heard someone whispering my name through the static. The mirror monitor. In our downtown museum, nestled between marble staircases and dusty vitrines, is the Victorian wing, complete with an interactive display that features a large dressing mirror wired to project augmented overlays of period clothing onto visitors. The mirror was more gimmick than attraction, a novelty that rarely functioned correctly. It wasn't connected to our surveillance system. In fact, it was considered a closed loop. No internet access, no recording capability, just a display screen and motion sensor. But at 2:07 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, the mirror activated on its own. Our main console, used to monitor all active cameras, suddenly registered a live feed from the Victorian wing, something that should have been impossible. I clicked into the camera, confused. On the screen, I saw a man standing behind the velvet rope, perfectly still. He wore a black frock coat, polished boots, and gloves. His appearance was striking, the sort of period-accurate figure you'd expect in a reenactment. But this wasn't an overlay. The lighting was wrong. His shadow stretched across the floor. He tilted his head, then took a step forward, past the rope, toward the mirror. The image on the screen shimmered as he moved closer. I waited for the software to glitch, to stutter or shut off. It didn't. He kept walking until his face was just inches from the glass. The screen flickered, and the lights in the museum dimmed for exactly 6 seconds. When they returned to full brightness, the mirror had gone black. The system dashboard cleared the live feed alert, and the Victorian wing appeared dormant once more. I reviewed the logs. There was no record of activation, no thermal motion detected, no error reports. But in the server archives, buried deep in the auto backup system, was a 13-minute video file. It showed the man standing silently, staring into the glass. In the final frame, his face pressed against the mirror. He didn't blink. He didn't move. But on the surface of the glass, fog had formed, as if he were breathing. Since that night, The climate control in the Victorian wing has malfunctioned exactly once per day. Always between 2 a.m. and 2:13 a.m., the temperature drops exactly 3 degrees. And once, when I walked past the mirror on my way to the freight elevator, I caught a glimpse of something behind me. There was no one there. The changing room feed. The upscale boutique I worked at wasn't just stylish. It was surgical in its precision. The floors were polished white stone, the display racks were brushed silver, and the lighting never cast a shadow. Every item of clothing was pristine, often worth more than I made in a week. To maintain that image, the owners invested in high-end security. Cameras were discreet, embedded in ceilings and corners, programmed to monitor without intruding, especially outside the fitting rooms. We were told they only picked up movement, nothing inside the stalls. They weren't invasive, just preventative. It was during the peak of winter that I started noticing strange motion alerts from changing room 3. Always late, always after the boutique had been closed for hours. The alerts came in short, irregular bursts, between 1 a.m. and 1:20 a.m., a window when the building was supposed to be still. At first, I assumed it was a system glitch, a recalibration issue. I filed a ticket. But the alerts didn't stop. They became more frequent, more specific. When I started reviewing the saved footage, I expected to find nothing. But what I saw chilled me. Sometimes it was just the stall door creaking open slowly on its own. Other times, it was a blur. What looked like fabric twisting in midair, hovering as if someone were examining it. Once, I caught the mirror flickering, just briefly, like someone passed between the camera and its reflection. But there was never a person, never a shadow that made sense. Then came the Sunday footage. It was clearer than usual. The door opened slowly, inch by inch, revealing the interior. A dress, one of our signature items, lifted off its hook, suspended as though being studied by invisible hands. It turned in the air, the hem rippling slightly, then floated deeper into the stall. No footsteps, no sound, just movement. Then it disappeared behind the curtain. That dress had been sold 3 weeks earlier. I checked the records myself. I showed the footage to my manager. She looked disturbed but tried to stay professional. Maybe it was returned and reshelved, she suggested. But when we went to check, it wasn't on the floor. It wasn't in inventory. It simply wasn't anywhere. Worse, the temperature around changing room 3 was noticeably colder. I started placing my hand against the door on closing shifts. It was always colder than the others. The mirror inside started fogging in ways that didn't match the room temperature. Eventually, I took a heavy cloth and covered it. Then, I locked the stall permanently. Still, the alerts came. Still, the system pinged movement in a room no one could enter. And sometimes, when I stay late, I smell something in the air. Not the boutique's signature fragrance, something older, powdery, sweet but sour around the edges. A perfume I don't recognize. The storage unit door. The storage facility I worked at sat just past the city limits. Rows and rows of metal doors under dim yellow lights, humming with silence after dark. It was the kind of place people forgot about until they needed to shove something into a corner of their life. My job was to monitor the cameras and report anything suspicious. The live feeds were basic, no sound, grainy video, but enough to catch the occasional raccoon, drunk tenant, or trespasser. It was dull, predictable work. Until Unit 119. That unit had been unoccupied for over a year. The door had rusted visibly along the bottom. No power outlet inside, no climate control. It was a dead zone. But for the last 2 months I worked there, Its camera triggered a motion alert nearly every night, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always when I was alone. The first alert showed the door vibrating, barely noticeable, like it was breathing. I assumed it was wind or settling metal. But the second night, the lock began to turn, slowly, deliberately, as if someone on the inside was twisting it. I called maintenance, and they came the next morning. The lock was intact. The door hadn't budged. They oiled the hinges and told me not to worry. A week later, I watched the door open on the feed. No one was nearby. The facility was silent, but the metal door creaked open inch by inch, revealing total darkness inside. Not the grainy gray of a camera's low light, just black, a void. No shelving, no reflection, no depth. And then something moved. A shape stepped into view. But not like a person, more like smoke stretching upward. It swirled near the threshold, shimmered slightly, and then shrank back into the dark. The door slammed shut. When I reviewed the footage, it glitched midway through. The timestamp reversed itself, flickered, and locked onto a new date. April 14th, 1998. The day the facility first opened. The original owners are long gone. There's no way the systems were recording back then. But the footage played like it had been waiting, like something had been watching the camera instead of the other way around. I requested a shift transfer the next morning. I never went back at night. But sometimes, when I drive past that road, I glance toward the long row of units. Unit 119 always looks slightly different, as if the door's been moved, or the shadow near the base is just a bit too long. And I still dream of the door, of the shape that lives just behind it, stretching. The office light. The law firm where I worked night security was as structured and polished as the suits its employees wore. Every floor, from the marble-floored lobby to the executive offices on the 6th, shut down by 7 p.m. sharp. The building ran on habit. Lights went out in sequence, computers powered down by remote settings, and the elevator locked down higher-level access. Most nights, the only movement I saw came from janitors or cleaning crews. The rest of the building sat quiet, a tomb of glass and chrome. After a break-in 2 years ago, the firm had installed motion-triggered lights and high-resolution cameras in every corridor. As the overnight guard, I was stationed in a control room surrounded by screens, each feeding me a window into some place silent and still. My main assignment was monitoring the 6th floor, where the senior partners' offices were spaced evenly like numbered crypts. Sleek doors, elegant desks, no reason for movement. That's why, when the light in Office 613 blinked on at exactly 2:19 a.m., I didn't think much of it. My first thought was someone forgot to turn it off. I toggled to the hallway feed to confirm, but everything was still. The office door remained closed, locked. There were no badge entries in the access log. Still, the overhead light glowed inside, and a shape passed across the frosted glass. I zoomed in. The silhouette didn't walk. It hovered, or rather glided. Shoulders hunched at an impossible angle, head listing sideways like it had come loose from its spine. I leaned closer. It passed again, slower this time. It stopped. Then a hand pressed flat against the glass. 5 fingers, but not fingers. They were too long, too narrow, with pointed ends like claws or splinters. The hand dragged downward. I went up to check. The elevator ride to 6 felt too slow. The air was stale. I walked the hallway alone, only my steps breaking the silence. Office 613 was closed, still locked. I touched the handle. It was freezing. Inside, it was pitch black, no sign the light had ever been on. Back in the control room, the recording still showed the light glowing bright. The shadow moved slowly now, no longer pacing, just waiting. Its face, if it had one, turned toward the door, toward me. I tried reporting the incident. The footage wouldn't export. The timestamp glitched and looped. When I came back the next night, the feed for 613 was offline. The camera had failed. No error logged. But now, every night at exactly 2:19 a.m., the system logs an attempt to access the 6th floor with no badge ID. And the hallway light outside 613 flickers just once. The back hall monitor. I worked overnight tech support in a mid-rise building shared by a handful of small companies and startups. Bare-bones spaces with mismatched furniture, whiteboards scribbled with half-baked pitches, and hallways that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee. Most of the upper floors were leased out, but the basement had remained mostly unused since the building opened. The only thing down there was a legal archive, a temperature-controlled room packed with filing cabinets and document crates that hadn't been touched in years. My workstation was directly above the basement stairwell, and part of my duty was monitoring its single hallway feed. The black and white camera showed a narrow corridor flanked by 2 doors, one leading to the archive, the other to an old boiler room that had been disconnected during renovations. The footage looped every few seconds. Nothing ever changed. Then one night, a little past 3 a.m., I saw a flicker. At first, it looked like static, a faint smudge passing across the screen too fast to register. I rewound it, frame by frame, and saw a blur, low to the ground, like a crouched figure dragging itself across the floor. I told myself it was a mouse, a trick of the angle. Nothing. But minutes later, the archive door creaked open on its own. Not wide, just enough to expose the blackness beyond. No one walked in, no access logs triggered. The badge system showed no activity. And still, the door remained half open, unmoving. Then the camera started shaking. Slightly at first, a low, vibrating tremor, as if someone was breathing onto the lens. The feed dissolved into static. When it returned, something was far too close to the camera. It hadn't approached, it had just appeared. A fragment of a shoulder in frame, the round arc of a cheek, an eye, open, unblinking. It stared at me through the grain. And then it blinked. I jumped back and pulled up system diagnostics. No errors, no signs of interference. I reported the issue. A contractor was sent the following day, but by then, the hallway had been painted, and the archive relocated upstairs. The camera remained, but no one bothered to reroute it. Now, every night at 3:03 a.m., the feed fuzzes out for 11 seconds. Sometimes it glitches just enough to show movement at the edge of the frame, a figure passing slowly and just outside the glow of the emergency light. And once, I thought I saw the archive door open again, on the camera that's no longer supposed to be connected. The night window. The corporate complex I monitored had floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a panoramic view of the city skyline. During the day, it made the building feel open and modern. But at night, those same windows became black mirrors, casting eerie reflections into dimly lit hallways and empty cubicles. Most employees left by 6, and by 9, the building descended into a sterile kind of silence. Yet the cameras never shut off, and I kept an eye on every feed from my station 2 floors below ground. The 14th floor always stood out, sleek, minimalist, and cold. It housed the senior marketing team, though it rarely saw after-hours use. Still, something about that floor never sat right. The windows on 14 always looked clean from outside. But from the inside, faint handprints lingered across the glass. They couldn't be wiped away. Not by staff, not by hired professionals. At 2:41 a.m. on a Thursday, one of the motion sensors on camera 14-3 pinged. I figured it was a glitch, maybe a loose piece of insulation or a drifting bug catching the light. But when I brought up the feed, I stopped cold. A figure stood outside the window. Not inside, outside. 14 stories up. There was no ledge, no balcony, no maintenance scaffolding, just a vertical drop to the street. Yet there it was. A tall, impossibly thin figure with hunched shoulders and elongated limbs, one hand pressed firmly against the glass. I tried to focus on its face, but the feed pixelated every time I got close, as though the camera itself refused to clarify it. The longer I stared, the more I noticed something subtle. Its fingers were leaving marks. Long, stretched prints smeared down the glass as it slowly moved its hand in a dragging motion. I checked the adjacent cameras. Nothing. The other angles showed the room from inside, empty. When I flipped back to camera 14-3, the figure was gone, but the print was still there, ghostly, glowing faintly under the emergency lights. I flagged the footage and sent someone up first thing that morning. The facilities guy radioed back. He said there was nothing on the glass, nothing to clean. He even shined a flashlight across the pane and ran his hand along the surface. Nothing. But that night, when I checked the live feed again, the handprint had returned. And it wasn't where it had been the night before. It was higher now. And there were two. Every Thursday since, the motion alert at 2:41 a.m. triggers with unsettling precision. Sometimes nothing shows. Sometimes the handprints multiply. Once, I thought I saw the shadow of the figure still standing outside, just barely visible in the corner of the frame. But I never see it leave. The cafeteria door. The ground floor cafeteria of our building was a ghost of its former self. Once bustling with coworkers chatting over sandwiches and vending machines humming, it had been shut down at the start of the pandemic and never reopened. Chairs were stacked in uneven piles, tables shoved against walls, and the machines unplugged, their dull plastic faces reflecting ceiling lights that never turned off. But for security reasons, the lights and the cameras remained on. Once a week, I was tasked with reviewing footage and logging any motion triggers. For almost a year, there was nothing. Then one Friday night, just after 3 a.m., I caught something. One of the monitors flared to life. Camera G Cafe showed the cafeteria door creaking open with excruciating slowness. There had been no alarm, no cleaning crew scheduled, and no logged entries through the rear staff corridor. Still, the door opened, paused, and began to swing shut, only to stop halfway. What followed haunts me to this day. From the darkness of the hallway, something entered the frame. It wasn't walking. It leaned. First ahead, pale, bald, with no discernible features other than the unnatural way it tilted. Then a hand, skeletal and long, trembled into view. It gripped the frame of the door as though testing its weight. I watched, frozen, as the figure lingered like that for several seconds, its body shuddering faintly, like a marionette hanging in still air. It never entered the cafeteria. It never crossed the threshold. Instead, it withdrew slowly, the fingers receding last, curling slightly as if inviting someone to follow. The door closed quietly. I reviewed the footage over and over. Each time, the figure became less defined. By the 5th viewing, the shape was reduced to a grainy blur. By the 10th, it was gone entirely. replaced by flickering static and a strange audio buzz that wasn't present in the original. But the timestamp remained. 3 a.m. And something worse began happening. Every time I scrubbed past that exact frame, my computer lagged just for a moment. Then the cafeteria lights. Those same fluorescent panels we were told were disconnected would flicker, not just on the camera, in real time. Only for a second. But it's enough. Enough to know it's still there. And waiting. The missing lobby feed. The building's main lobby was as pristine as it was imposing. Marble floors gleaming under soft lights, a sculpture installation that rotated every month, and towering glass doors that reflected the streetlights outside like a curtain of ice. The security gates, metallic and silent, required ID badges to pass, and by midnight, they clicked into lockdown. As the night guard, I watched this grand entryway from my station 2 floors down, where 4 screens gave me continuous views of the revolving doors, front desk, elevator bays, and security vestibule. Nothing ever happened after 10 p.m. The cleaning crew left by midnight, and no one returned until at least 6 in the morning. That's why it made no sense when, at 1:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, the camera labeled lobby 1 cut to black. There was no alert, no system malfunction, no flicker, just a quiet, immediate blackout of the feed. I checked the other lobby cams. Lobby 2 and 3 were fine. The elevators hadn't been accessed. I rebooted the feed, expecting a minor error. Still nothing. I logged a maintenance request. The technician arrived mid-morning and ran diagnostics. According to him, the camera had been online the whole time. No issues, he said. No gap in the footage, no errors on record. I showed him my logs. I showed him the feed drop. He scratched his head. System says it never disconnected. When the camera finally came back online later that night, something had changed. The angle was different, barely noticeable, but off. The frame had shifted left, just enough to crop the front desk out of view. It didn't seem like much, but I knew exactly how that camera had been installed. The housing was bolted down. It shouldn't have moved. The same thing happened the next night, and the night after. At exactly 1:42 a.m., the feed would cut out for exactly 9 minutes and 30 seconds. When it returned, the angle would be slightly more skewed. Over a week, the camera rotated so much that it was no longer pointed at the lobby at all. It showed a portion of the ceiling and a section of wall with an empty painting hook. Then, on Thursday, just before the blackout, I saw something. A single frame flickered into view. A figure, tall, emaciated, featureless, stood inside the entrance, not walking, not moving, just there. Then the feed cut. When it returned, the figure was gone. But in the reflection of the glass doors, something faint moved away. Something without a shadow. I replaced the camera. I recalibrated the angle myself. That night, the blackout didn't happen. But another camera, a hallway feed near the security office, flickered once, then went black. The elevator reset. In the southwest wing of the complex was an elevator that most employees didn't even know existed. It was an old service lift, installed decades ago when the building still had a functioning warehouse floor. Technically, it still worked, but it wasn't listed on any current directory or digital floor plans. You needed an override code to access it, and only a few of the engineers or security staff like me knew it still ran. For years, the elevator sat unused. Dust gathered around its doors. Its panel inside the control room always read, idle. Until one night, At exactly 2:10 a.m., the feed labeled Elevator 7 activated. It showed movement. The panel lit up. The car was descending from the 6th floor. I checked access logs. No override had been used. The building was locked down. I switched to the camera inside the elevator. At first, it looked empty. The overhead lights flickered as the car descended. The metal walls bore scratches from years of cargo. But then the car stopped at the basement, and the doors opened. Nothing happened. Then something stepped inside. Not a person, not clearly. A blurry gray form stood in the center of the car. It resembled a human shape, but the camera couldn't focus on it. The longer I watched, the more it resolved. Arms by its sides, a suit that seemed too tight on a body too long. No facial features, just smooth, pale skin where a face should be. The car began rising. As it moved floor to floor, the figure shifted slightly with each frame. The arms gained weight. The torso bulked out. The suit adjusted. By the time it reached the 6th floor, it almost looked human, except for the head, tilted sharply to the right, like it was listening for something just outside the doors. The car stopped. The doors didn't open. Then the lights inside blew out. When the feed returned, the elevator was back at the basement level. Empty. The system log labeled it a manual reset. But no one had called it. No one had been in the basement. The override hadn't been used. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same pattern. But now, the figure stood closer to the elevator camera. Its body was clearer, and its head wasn't tilted anymore. It was staring directly into the lens.